Hey guys, Sean Lentz here from Appalachian DIY. Today I'm going to show you how to clean up your tabletops from your woodworking equipment, especially if they have some rust on them. I'm going to show you how to clean that up and better protect them. The first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to clean up these tabletops. I have a joiner here and a bandsaw, and these are probably the two worst machines in my shop as far as rust goes. I was negligent this winter and didn't do any preventive maintenance, so out here in this garage there's no climate control, so the rise and fall of the temperature, this cold steel accumulates a lot of moisture on it, and it just gets this beautiful light rust over everything. So we need to get that off first and get these tabletops back in good condition. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sand down this rust. But be very mindful of the grit sandpaper that you use. A lot of guys will say use 40 or 60 grit if you have some heavy pitting, and that's absolutely the worst thing to do because you're going to end up scraping and gouging out your tabletop with that heavy grit. The heaviest grit I would go with is 80, and that's if you have something that's been sitting in a barn for 20 years and it has some heavy rust and pitting on it. That's the most I would go. For what we have right here, I have a lot of surface rust with some very minor pitting, so we're going to start out with 120 on an orbital sander and sand that down until we get about bare metal. If you have any really heavy pitting after that, you have it sanded down, I would go over it with a wire wheel with a fine setting. They are the ones with the really thin wires on them, not the heavy ones, and just buff that rust out to get rid of it. So that's what we're going to start with now. The first thing that we're going to do before we go ahead and sand is give this a light shot of penetrating oil. It's going to give it a nice little slurry as we sand it, and it's also going to cut down on the dust so we don't breathe that in. Now we can go ahead and wipe this slurry off and see how well it did. So you can see how well that did. That took about 95% of that rust off just by sanding it down like that. As you can see here, there's a lot of staining and stuff on this top. But don't worry about that too much because that's going to be really tough to get out. I would just worry and focus on getting the rust off. You can really see how this tabletop is starting to shine already, and that was just literally with about 45 seconds of sanding. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to take a Scotch-Brite pad and do the same process over. We're going to give it a light shot of oil over it so it makes the pad slide around a little bit easier. And we're going to take the same orbital sander, and this has a hook and loop system on this, and that kind of sticks to these pads pretty well. So we're going to take that and go over this again and really buff this thing to a mirror finish. These are the heavy duty pads. You can also use the non-scratch ones, which will be even less than this, so you can do a two-step process. I don't have the blue ones with me, so you can do the green ones, which are heavy duty, go over it, wipe it down, and then do the blue ones again, and that's going to give you a really smooth finish. You'll start to notice that it gets darker as you sand and buff it with that Scotch-Brite pad. You'll get these beautiful little swirls in it, and the longer you go, the more that it gets into the metal and just buffs out all of that nastiness. So make sure that you're getting this thing and spending a good bit of time with the Scotch-Brite, a lot more so than with the sandpaper, because this is where it gets it really nice and smooth and buffs that out. If at all possible, try to use a clean rag every single time you do a different step. You can just take this and wipe that right off. That looks beautiful. You can go over it with your hand, and that is really smooth. The next step that you could do is those non-scratch pads to get it even smoother if you would like. There are some areas here where we can't get into here with the sander, so we're going to have to do this by hand. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to clean up the tabletops. It has some of that oily residue on there, and we don't want that interfering with our last step. So the best thing to do is take something like Brake Clean and spray this down, get all of that residue off, because this doesn't leave any residue itself. It cleans it very spotless. You can take a terry cloth towel and just buff it off and make sure that everything is in really pristine condition and there's no dust or any type of rust or oil on these tops at all. Now that we have these tops down to bare metal, they're unprotected. So if we came back in 3 days and there got a little bit of moisture in here, this tabletop is going to be completely coated in a very fine rust. So we want to help protect against that. And there's 2 ways to do that. The first is long term, and that's with your oils. I use a gun oil on mine and just give it a nice good coating. You can do that if you're getting into winter and you're not going to be using these things or storing them for a long period of time. That gun oil gets into all those nooks and crannies and it really helps protect it from rusting. So if you're in for it for long term or packing your stuff away, give it a coating of either penetrating oil, or I like to use gun oil. I think that works the best. If you're going to be using your stuff right away, what you want to do is use a wax. There are tons of waxes that you can use, and it really doesn't matter. It's all personal preference. There's automotive waxes, there's woodworking waxes, and any of those will do. My personal preference is I like the new finish. I think it does a really good job, and it gives you a really nice, smooth finish to it. So what we're going to do is apply this wax, let it harden, and then buff it off. That's going to give you a nice smooth surface for your wood to slip on. It's going to glide right across your tabletops like glass, and it's going to be so nice. So this is your short-term solution. You're going to have to apply this if you're running a lot of stuff on this, if you're doing a huge project. After you're done, go ahead and apply that wax again so you can protect it, because it's going to rub all that stuff off. If you're in it for the long term, get something like gun oil or just a fine coat of penetrating oil on this to help protect it. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to take some of this new finish. The best thing to use is a microfiber towel, something that doesn't leave around lint, but I just have regular towels that works just fine also. So go ahead and give this a nice, generous, thin coat and buff this in really good. Once the wax starts to dry and it gets a nice haze over it, go ahead and buff it out. Once you've buffed everything off, that's pretty much it. These the tops now have a super nice glide to them. Wood will glide over this really nice. It's going to protect these, and you won't have that rusting issue. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. Head over to Appalachian DIY for more videos. Thanks again, guys, and I hope to see you next time.